The heat over Willamette Valley was dry that morning, the kind that baked the air until every breath tasted of dust and sunlight. I knelt at the edge of a shallow trench, notebook balanced on one knee, camera in my hand. Beneath the packed soil lay a curve of bone, pale against the darker earth, a story folded into silence. I brushed away another layer with the tip of my trowel, careful not to disturb the fragile shape. The bone was human. My pulse steadied as training replaced awe. Context first, always context. I measured, photographed, recorded. Still, something about the burial pattern tugged at me, the symmetry too deliberate for coincidence. Someone had placed this person here with care, centuries before the first settlers mapped this valley. Behind me, machinery idled, impatient for permission to continue digging. The foreman had already asked twice when I would finish. I ignored the question and kept documenting. Deadlines never frightened me, but misreading history did. My glove slipped as I reached for the next fragment. A streak of reddish clay marked my wrist. Before I could wipe it off, a voice called from above. "Dr. Santaro, you're going to cook out here," someone said. I looked up. A woman stood near the safety barrier, sunlight catching the copper strands in her tied-back hair. Her work shirt was rolled at the elbows, jeans streaked with mud. She held a folded towel in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. Brooke Ellison, she introduced herself when I climbed out of the pit. Forestry consultant. Rosa from Kim's greenhouse sent me to check on the soil around your site. Something about nutrient balance before the expansion. I accepted the towel with a brief nod, pressing it to my neck. The cloth carried the faint scent of mint soap and cedar. Appreciate it. It's hotter than usual for spring. Brooke smiled, easy and unhurried. The land's thirsty. You can tell by the color. Too much disturbance lately. Her gaze shifted toward the trench. What did you find? A burial, I said. Older than we expected. She crouched beside me, eyes narrowing as she studied the exposed layer. When a strand of hair slipped forward, she pushed it back with the back of her wrist, leaving a thin smear of dirt along her cheek. I found myself wanting to brush it away, but focused on the site instead. Brooke leaned closer, peering at the bone. It looks arranged, doesn't it? Like whoever buried them wanted balance. The observation surprised me. Most people saw only bones or dirt. She saw pattern. Exactly, I replied. She straightened and handed me the water. Our fingers met, brief, warm, deliberate. For a heartbeat, the noise from the machines faded, replaced by the quiet hum of wind through distant trees. I swallowed the thought that followed, something I hadn't let myself feel in years. We spent the next hour walking the perimeter, discussing soil structure, moisture retention, microfungal growth. She spoke with an instinct that came from long years outdoors, not from theory, but from living with the land. Every word felt grounded, precise. I caught the subtle rhythm of her voice, the way she paused before answering, as if listening to the ground itself. At one point, she noticed a smear of dust across my collar and stepped forward to brush it off. The motion was casual, yet her fingers grazed just above my chest, leaving behind a tingling awareness that lingered after her hand withdrew. She smiled quickly, pretending not to notice, though her breath hitched just slightly. "You work too close to the earth," she said softly. "It's the only way to hear what it's trying to say." Brooke tilted her head, studying me. "Then we're alike. I listen to trees. You listen to bones." The phrase stayed with me. Later, while collecting my equipment, I glanced toward her truck. She was bent over a soil sample, sunlight spilling over her shoulders, arms strong from real labor. There was something steady in the way she moved, deliberate but graceful. When she waved me over, I hesitated before joining her. She held up a handful of soil, dark and crumbling between her fingers. "Feel that," she said. "Too compacted. No airflow. It's suffocating the roots." I reached out, and she guided my hand beneath hers, letting the soil fall through both our palms. The sensation was unexpectedly intimate, the earth warm against our skin. "You can tell all that just from touch?" I asked. She nodded. "Touch tells you more than instruments sometimes. Like reading a pulse." Her eyes met mine. Yours is racing. I almost laughed, almost stepped back, but curiosity kept me there. Field conditions, I said. Of course, she murmured, but the faint curve of her mouth said she didn't believe me. We walked back toward the pit in silence. The afternoon light turned softer, filtering through a haze of pollen. The workers had shut down the machinery for the day, leaving only the hum of insects. Brooke stopped near the barrier tape and looked out across the valley. You ever get tired of digging up the past? She asked. Never. The past keeps the present honest. She nodded, thoughtful. I feel that way about soil. It remembers everything we do to it. When I turned to pack the last of my gear, she was still watching me. Something in her expression had shifted, quieter now, almost reverent. If you're ever curious, she said, you should visit my truffle groves. I could show you how soil tells stories of its own. The invitation hung between us, simple and direct. I should have declined. I should have said I was busy with permits, reports, samples. Instead, I heard myself say, tomorrow works. Her smile was quick, luminous. Then tomorrow it is. Bring gloves. She turned toward her truck, leaving behind the faint trail of cedar and dust. I stood in the fading light, watching until the sound of her engine disappeared down the road. The towel she'd given me was still around my neck, its scent clinging to my skin. I didn't realize I was smiling until the foreman called my name. That night, as I filed my notes, I kept pausing on one line I'd written earlier, burial deliberate, orientation east-west, objects suggesting continuity of care. The words seemed to describe more than the bones. Beneath the data and coordinates, something else was beginning to take shape, fragile and alive, waiting just under the surface. I told myself it was professional curiosity, that I wanted to study her soil techniques, nothing more. Yet when I closed my notebook, my fingers still remembered the warmth of her hand guiding mine through the earth, the brief brush against my collar, the slow, steady rhythm of her breath beside me. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of oak and distant rain. I imagined her somewhere among the trees, still listening to the ground. The thought shouldn't have comforted me, but it did. In 15 years of unearthing the dead, I'd forgotten how a live discovery could feel. The next morning came with a pale stretch of light over the valley, soft and quiet after a night of wind. I drove toward Brooke's property, the road narrowing between rows of alder and pine. The air smelled faintly of wet bark and grass, the kind of scent that makes you slow down without realizing it. Her farm sat beyond a rusted gate framed by 2 old oak trees whose branches met above like clasped hands. A pair of dogs bounded toward me, tails high and fur streaked with mud. Brooke appeared behind them, boots dusted, coffee cup in hand, her hair twisted loosely at the nape. You found it, she said as I stepped out of the truck. I followed the scent of earth, I replied, and she smiled like she understood. The dogs circled me, noses twitching at the hem of my jeans. Brooke crouched to scratch their heads. Juniper and clove. They think every new visitor hides a secret in their pockets. They might be right, I said, kneeling to let them sniff my palms. Their tails thumped against the ground, leaving streaks of soil on my sleeve. Brooke reached out automatically, brushing the mark away with her thumb. The contact was brief, yet the warmth of her skin lingered far longer than it should have. Sorry, she murmured, pulling back. It's fine, I said, though my voice came out softer than intended. She led me through the orchard, explaining how truffles grow in symbiosis with oak roots, their spores weaving delicate connections through the soil. The explanation came alive as she spoke. She moved with an easy confidence, every gesture sure, every word grounded in experience rather than theory. Sunlight filtered through the branches, scattering gold across her shoulders. See that one? She pointed toward a cluster of trees where the grass seemed greener. That's where Juniper starts her search. The dog darted ahead, nose low to the ground, circling with practiced focus. Brooke followed, her hand brushing against mine as she steadied herself on the uneven terrain. The brush of skin sent a sudden jolt through me, a spark as fleeting as it was undeniable. She didn't pull away this time. Watch, she whispered. Juniper pawed at a patch of dirt and let out a short bark. Brooke knelt, motioning for me to do the same. Our shoulders touched as we crouched side by side. Her hand moved close to mine as she began to loosen the soil with a small trowel. Each movement was precise, almost reverent. When she unearthed the dark nugget from beneath the roots, she held it up between us. Tuber oregonensis, she said quietly. A native black truffle. I reached out to take it. Her fingers brushed my palm as she passed it over, and the faint shock of warmth felt almost electric. I lifted it to my nose, inhaling deeply. The scent was dense and earthy, laced with something sweet, something that reminded me of rain-soaked leaves. It smells alive, I said. That's the idea, she whispered, still close enough that her breath touched my cheek. When I looked up, she was watching me, her expression unreadable yet open. For a moment, the world seemed to still, every sound fading beneath the weight of that gaze. Then she leaned in, slow enough that I could have stepped back but didn't. Her lips met mine, light and uncertain at first, tasting faintly of coffee and wind. The kiss deepened for a heartbeat before she pulled away, her face flushed with something between surprise and relief. I shouldn't have done that, she said softly. Probably not, I replied, though my heart was still catching up to the moment. We stood there, silence threading through the air. Then she laughed quietly, shaking her head. Well, now that the truffle's found, we might as well celebrate. Come on, there's coffee in the shed. Inside, the air was warm, carrying the mixed aromas of wood, soil, and dried herbs. Tools hung neatly along the walls, jars labeled with soil samples and fungal cultures. Brooke poured coffee into 2 mugs and handed me one. Our fingers brushed again, and this time she didn't look away. You're quieter today, she said. Still processing, I admitted. It's not every day I find evidence of pre-colonial agriculture and kiss the person who grows truffles over it. She laughed, leaning against the table. You make it sound so dramatic. It is dramatic, I said. You found a piece of living history under your land. It changes what we know about this region. Her smile softened. You talk like the earth is an archive. Maybe it is, I said. It just needs the right translator. Then we make a good team, she replied. The words carried more meaning than they should have. Outside, the dogs barked, chasing a squirrel through the oaks. The sound broke whatever stillness had formed between us, yet it didn't erase it. Brooke set down her mug, stepping closer. Her thumb brushed a streak of dirt from my cheek. Guess you belong to the soil too, she said quietly. I laughed under my breath. It's mutual. She looked at me for a long moment before turning away. Come on, she said, there's something else you should see. We walked along a narrow path that wound through the trees until it opened onto a gentle slope overlooking the valley. The view stretched endlessly, patchwork fields shimmering in the afternoon light. Brooke stood beside me, arms folded loosely, eyes distant. My grandparents used to tell me this land remembers kindness, she said. If you care for it, it gives back in ways you don't expect. You believe that? I've seen it happen. Every healthy root, every harvest, it's all connected. People, trees, soil. Even bones. The mention of bones caught my attention. You think what we found at the construction site could connect to this land? She nodded slowly. I'd bet on it. The soil composition here matches the samples near your trench. Whoever lived here knew how to nurture an ecosystem, not exploit it. Her insight startled me. I wanted to ask how she'd noticed the similarity, but instead found myself watching the way the light brushed the edge of her profile. The moment felt fragile, balanced between discovery and something far more personal. When a breeze passed through the trees, a few leaves drifted down, catching in her hair. Without thinking, I reached out to remove one. My fingers grazed her temple, sliding through strands warm from the sun. She didn't move away. The faint rhythm of her breathing filled the space between us. You always do that, she murmured. What? Get too close to things you want to understand. I smiled faintly. You make it sound like a flaw. Maybe it's not, she said, voice low. The dogs barked again in the distance, pulling her attention. She turned away, breaking the tension, and I exhaled slowly. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a deep blue. Brooke showed me the irrigation channels her grandparents had restored decades ago, small trenches designed to guide water through the grove. The design was intricate, far older than modern systems, and something about its precision felt intentional, almost ceremonial. "These patterns," I said, crouching to examine the carved stones lining the path, "they're consistent with the burial site." So whoever worked this land before understood more than just farming. "They managed balance," I said. "Exactly what we're trying to relearn." She crouched beside me, our shoulders brushing again. "Maybe that's why you found it," she said. "You were ready to listen." Her tone carried no flirtation, only quiet conviction, yet the closeness between us hummed with unspoken meaning. When I looked at her, the air seemed thicker, charged. As the sun dipped lower, we returned to her porch. She poured us water from a clay pitcher, and we sat without speaking for a while. The silence was not awkward but weighted, filled with the residue of the day. When I finally rose to leave, Brooke followed me to the truck. The fading light caught in her hair, turning it almost gold. "Tomorrow I'll map the route spread," she said. "You should come. The soil still has more to tell." "I'll be here," I answered. She reached for my sleeve as if to dust something away, fingers lingering longer than necessary. "You missed a spot," she said, though there was no dirt there. I met her gaze, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then she stepped back, smiles small but certain. "Drive safe, Maya." The road out of the valley curved between the trees, and in my rearview mirror I saw her silhouette framed by the porch light, watching until I disappeared around the bend. The image stayed with me long after the farm was out of sight, long after the air lost the scent of oak and truffle. Something had shifted beneath the surface that day, as subtle and as deep as the roots we'd walked among. The third week began with silence that felt too deliberate. I noticed it first in my inbox, a line of unread messages that all carried the same subject line, each one a variation of curiosity disguised as politeness. "Is it true?" The words meant nothing and everything at once. By noon, I understood what they were asking. Someone had published a romanticized article online describing a forbidden affair between a government archaeologist and a truffle farmer. It mentioned my excavation site by name. It mentioned her farm. It mentioned us. I sat at my desk, hands still dusted with soil from that morning's sample analysis. The headline glowed on the screen, a blend of speculation and poetry that twisted fact into fantasy. I felt heat rise to my face, not from shame but disbelief. The author even quoted fabricated dialogue, turning quiet professional conversations into scenes of desire whispered among ruins. I scrolled faster, heart pounding. Toward the end of the article was a photograph someone had taken of Brooke and me beside the trench, our heads tilted close as we compared notes. My phone buzzed before I could close the page. Brooke's name flashed on the screen. "Have you seen it?" she asked. "Yes." They used my full address. I already had 2 reporters drive up the road. Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to steady it. "I told them to leave, but it's spreading. I'll call my department. We'll handle it." After we hung up, I phoned DR. Helena Ortiz, the department chair. Her tone was clipped, the kind she used when balancing patience with irritation. "Maya, I'm getting calls from donors and the Historical Society. They're concerned about impropriety." "Impropriety?" I repeated. "There's a photograph of you and MS. Ellison. People are talking about conflict of interest, about bias in your reports." "I haven't violated any protocol," I said. "The article is fiction." "Maybe, but perception matters. I suggest you step back from the site until things calm down." It wasn't a suggestion. By the end of the call, I'd been asked to take administrative leave to protect the department's reputation. The screen dimmed as the call ended, my reflection faint against it, small and tired. That evening, I drove to Brooke's farm. News vans were parked by the gate, their antennae pointing upward like silver weeds. A reporter waved as I passed, shouting a question about the archaeologist and the farmer in love. I didn't answer. Brooke was on the porch, hair tied back, face pale except for the flush of anger on her cheeks. "They say I seduced you to steal artifacts," she said the moment I stepped out of the truck. "That's ridiculous. Tell them that." "They won't listen to me." She threw a folded newspaper onto the table. The story had spread beyond the internet now. Someone had even mocked up a cover image of two women silhouetted against an oak grove, one holding a trowel, the other a basket. I picked it up, reading the captions. "The forbidden romance that uncovered a buried civilization." Brooke's laughter was sharp, brittle. "They turned our research into pulp fiction." I met her gaze. "Then we show them the truth." "How?" "Words don't compete with gossip." "With proof," I said. "The real evidence. The documentation, the data, every measured layer." That night, we sat in her kitchen surrounded by notes, maps, soil samples, and photographs. The smell of coffee filled the air as rain tapped against the windows. Her dogs lay at our feet, oblivious to the storm both outside and between us. When Brooke leaned over the table to hand me a sample bag, her sleeve brushed my arm. The touch grounded me, reminding me that beyond the noise, there was still the steady presence that had drawn me to her in the first place. "Rosa can help," I said. "People trust her. If she hosts a meeting at the greenhouse, we can show the community what we actually found." Brooke looked skeptical. "You think anyone will care about stratigraphy when they're reading about passion under the trees?" "They will if they see the science. We'll bring transparency, not denial." Rosa agreed the next day, her eyes fierce behind her glasses. "You two have done nothing wrong," she said. "We'll start small, local voices first. The truth will travel." We worked for days compiling a presentation. Brooke built visual models showing the truffle network beneath the oaks, connecting it to the ancient irrigation systems I'd mapped. I refined my notes on burial patterns, integrating her soil data. Each evening we stayed longer, exhaustion folding into quiet companionship. On the fourth night, as we rearranged display boards, Brooke accidentally brushed paint across her cheek. I reached out before thinking, wiping it gently with my thumb. Her breath caught. My hand lingered longer than necessary, tracing the curve of her jaw before I pulled back. "Sorry," I said. She shook her head. "You're not." "No," I admitted. The air between us shifted, heavy with everything unsaid. The scent of wet soil and paint mixed with the faint warmth of coffee. When she leaned forward, her lips found mine again. No hesitation this time, only certainty. The kiss was slow, quiet, filled with everything we'd been holding back. When we finally stepped apart, she whispered, "Now we're really giving them a story." "Let them write," I said. "We'll write ours better." The day of the presentation arrived with clear skies. Rosa's greenhouse was filled with folding chairs and curious faces. Farmers, students, local reporters. Brooke spoke first, explaining the ecology of truffles and their link to soil restoration. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had earned every ounce of knowledge through work. I followed with maps and photographs, tracing the connections between the ancient irrigation systems and sustainable agriculture. Questions came, some sharp, some sincere. When someone asked about the relationship scandal, Rosa stepped forward before I could answer. "What you see here are two professionals who uncovered a piece of our shared history," she said firmly. "Anything else belongs in fiction." Applause followed, hesitant at first, then stronger. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension in my chest ease. Brooke's hand brushed mine as we packed up afterward. "Maybe we turned it around," she said quietly. "Maybe," I replied. But the story refused to die easily. The next morning, a major magazine published an exclusive interview with an anonymous source claiming to know intimate details of our partnership. The lies were relentless. My phone vibrated until I turned it off. When I checked my email, there were messages from colleagues expressing concern, pity, or amusement. By afternoon, Dr. Ortiz called again. "The situation has escalated," she said. "The university is being pressured to investigate." "I'm sorry, Maya, but your field access is revoked until further notice." The line went quiet after that. I sat in my car outside Brooke's gate, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. Inside the house, Brooke was pacing. 3 clients canceled today, she said without looking at me. They think I'm part of some archaeological hoax. They want distance. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away, frustration in her eyes. You said truth would fix this. But truth doesn't sell like scandal does. We'll keep fighting. Against what, Maya? Against everyone. Her voice cracked, and the anger dissolved into exhaustion. I stepped closer, cupping her face with both hands. We can't control what they write, but we can control what we build. Her eyes softened. And what are we building? Something that will outlast gossip. She closed her eyes, leaning into my touch. For a moment, the noise outside vanished again. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog, the rhythm of her breathing, that was all that existed. Later, as the rain began again, we moved to the small lab behind her house to continue sorting samples. She handed me a jar labeled Root Zone 3, her fingers brushing mine. The gesture was wordless reassurance. We worked side by side, no longer speaking about the scandal, focusing instead on the quiet language of soil and stone. When I looked up, she was watching me. You still believe this is worth it? She asked. I do. She smiled faintly. Then so do I. That night, I wrote in my field journal by the dim light of a single lamp. Public perception temporary, evidence permanent. It was a simple truth, but it steadied me. I added another line beneath it, smaller, almost hidden. And some connections, once unearthed, cannot be buried again. Outside, the rain eased to a whisper. I imagined the roots beneath the soil carrying water through their hidden networks, silent but alive, unbothered by what happened above. Somewhere in that darkness, the truffles would keep growing, slow and unseen, waiting for the right moment to surface again. The morning after the greenhouse presentation felt strangely calm. The phone no longer rang every hour, and the reporters seemed to have found new stories to chase. For the first time in weeks, the air around the farm was quiet except for the wind through the trees. I stood at the edge of Brooke's grove, camera in hand, sunlight filtering across the rows of oaks. The earth beneath them looked peaceful, as if unaware of the noise that had surrounded it. Brooke joined me, her boots brushing against the grass, a notebook tucked beneath one arm. Looks like they finally got bored, she said, eyes following the light through the leaves. Maybe they moved on to someone else's disaster, I replied. Her laughter was soft, cautious. I'll take that as progress. We had decided to keep documenting even after my suspension. If the university wouldn't protect the research, we would protect it ourselves. Every sample, every soil core, every sketch of the irrigation channels now lived in duplicate form, locked away and backed up on drives. The project had become personal, something that belonged to both of us now. Brooke crouched to check a cluster of mushrooms near a fallen branch. You know, she said, when I was a kid, I used to think the ground was breathing. The way it swells after rain, the smell when it exhales. I thought it was alive. Maybe you were right, I said. We just call it ecosystem dynamics to sound professional. She smiled, straightened, and brushed a leaf from her hair. The gesture made my chest tighten. Every time I looked at her now, I saw both strength and weariness, the quiet resilience of someone who refused to bend. We spent that day mapping new sections of the grove. The dogs darted between us, their paws kicking up soft sprays of soil. Each time Brooke leaned over to mark a point, her shoulder brushed mine. It was an unspoken rhythm, movement, and proximity blending until touch no longer felt accidental. By mid-afternoon, we paused to rest beside the old irrigation trench. Brooke poured water from a canteen, handing it to me. Her fingers brushed the back of my hand, the contact lingering for a fraction longer than necessary. You still think this will matter? She asked. I think it already does, I said. Even if no one else believes us yet. Her gaze held mine, steady and searching. Then let's make them believe. In the following weeks, we prepared a formal paper. Rosa helped us gather historical records, while Dr. Leo Park quietly shared data from the lab. Late nights turned into early mornings, the house filled with the smell of coffee and the rustle of papers. Sometimes I would look up from a paragraph and find Brooke studying me, a small crease between her brows. When I asked what she was thinking, she always said, "Just trying to understand how you fit so much truth into so few words." The article was submitted to quaternary research in early spring. We didn't expect to hear back quickly, but the acceptance email came faster than either of us imagined. The editor called the findings groundbreaking, the first documented evidence of coordinated forest management predating colonial records. I read the message twice before it sank in. Brooke was standing by the counter when I told her. She dropped the trowel she'd been holding, eyes wide. Then she laughed, the sound bright and disbelieving. "We did it. We did it," I said, and before I could add anything else, she crossed the room and pulled me into her arms. The hug turned into something deeper, her face buried against my neck, the warmth of her skin chasing away months of exhaustion. That evening, Rosa arrived with champagne and a grin. "You're both officially famous again," she announced. But this time for the right reasons. The celebration was modest, just the three of us under the porch lights. When Rosa left, Brooke and I stayed outside, listening to the crickets. The air was cool, the scent of wet grass rising from the fields. "Do you think it's over?" she asked quietly. "Maybe not," I said. "But it's changing." She turned toward me, her expression unreadable. "You changed everything for me, Maya." I wanted to answer, but she leaned in first. The kiss was slow, deliberate, different from the others, not a question this time, but an answer. The world around us faded until all that remained was warmth and breath and the faint tremor of her hand resting against my back. When we finally broke apart, she whispered, "Stay." So I did. Over the next month, attention returned, but this time it was academic. The university reopened my case and Dr. Ortiz invited me to discuss reinstatement. I walked into her office with the article in hand. She read in silence, page after page, until she set it down and met my eyes. "You were right to trust the evidence," she said. "I'm recommending full reinstatement and tenure review." The words hit me harder than expected. "Thank you," I managed. "You should thank MS. Ellison too," she added. Her name on that paper gave it life. Outside, I called Brooke before I even reached the car. "We're back," I told her. She laughed. I never left. When I returned to the farm that evening, she was waiting by the greenhouse. The dogs ran ahead, tails wagging wildly. She held up 2 envelopes. Guess what came in the mail? I opened the first one. It was a letter from the National Science Foundation approving a 3-year grant for expanded excavation and agricultural analysis. The second envelope held a formal invitation to present our work at an environmental symposium. Brooke was grinning. "Looks like we're going international." I looked at her, sun setting behind her shoulder, and felt something tighten in my throat. All the months of tension, doubt, and waiting condensed into a single moment of clarity. "We started this in the dirt," I said. "And we'll keep it there," she replied. "That's where life begins." We spent the following weeks preparing for the symposium. I practiced the slides while she refined the data sets. Our days blended into each other, filled with quiet focus and shared laughter. Sometimes she would correct my pronunciation of a fungal species, teasing me until I smiled. Other times I caught her staring at me across the table, a look that felt like gratitude and something more. The night before we left for the conference, we walked through the grove one last time. The air was warm, filled with the sound of frogs near the stream. Brooke reached for my hand as we stopped beneath the largest oak. "This place feels different now," she said. "It's always been the same. We just see it clearly." She leaned against me, head resting on my shoulder. "Promise me one thing. No matter how far we go, we keep listening to the land." "I promise," I said. Her hand tightened around mine, grounding me the way the soil always had. The wind moved through the branches above, carrying the scent of truffles and rain, and for the first time in a long while, the future felt solid beneath our feet. Geneva was bright that morning, sunlight glinting off the lake like liquid glass. I stood behind the podium, papers trembling only slightly in my hands, and tried to ignore the hundreds of faces waiting for me to speak. My name had just been announced, followed by Brooks, and the applause that filled the hall carried a rhythm I hadn't heard in months, not the noise of curiosity or gossip, but genuine recognition. Brooke sat in the front row, hair neatly tied, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. The sight steadied me. I began with the basics, explaining how our fieldwork in Oregon had revealed a network of ancient cultivation systems once thought impossible for that region. As I spoke, I clicked through slides showing irrigation channels, soil diagrams, and cross-sections of root systems. The audience leaned forward, pens moving fast. When Brooke joined me on stage halfway through, the room shifted. She spoke without notes, her voice low but sure, describing the living relationships between fungus and trees, how mutual exchange sustained entire ecosystems. The crowd responded not with applause, but with silence, the kind that signals deep attention. When she finished, I added one last line. The people who shaped that landscape were not primitive, not incidental. They were scientists in their own right. We are only rediscovering what they already knew. The applause rose like a tide. It wasn't just for the data, but for the partnership behind it, the visible proof that two different disciplines could merge into something whole. Afterward, researchers approached us with questions and handshakes, invitations to collaborate, requests for data access. Brooke accepted each one gracefully, and I watched her glow in a way that reminded me of sunlight filtering through oak leaves. That evening, the conference hosted a small reception on a terrace overlooking the city. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wine and citrus from the tables. Brooke and I stepped away from the crowd, leaning against the railing. The Alps loomed pale in the distance, their peaks catching the last light. "Do you remember the first day in the grove?" she asked. "How could I forget? You made me smell the soil." She laughed softly. "You looked offended at first." "I wasn't offended," I said. "Just surprised that something buried could smell that alive." Her gaze turned toward the mountains. "Maybe that's what we've been doing all along. Bringing things back to life." We stood in silence for a while, the murmur of conversation fading behind us. When she reached for my hand, I didn't hesitate. The city lights below flickered like reflections on water, and for a moment, I felt as if the world had settled into balance again. Months passed quickly after Geneva. The research center became reality, funded jointly by the university and environmental foundations. The sign outside read the Santoro Ellison Center for Ecological Heritage, the letters carved into stone salvaged from an old mill. Brooke insisted on planting native oaks around the building, saying the land needed to feel at home too. I moved my office there, trading the hum of city traffic for the quiet rustle of leaves. Students arrived from across the country, eager to study sustainable systems rooted in the past. Our days filled with lectures, field trips, endless drafts of proposals. At night, the work gave way to quiet routines, cooking, reading, tracing lines of soil data across the kitchen table. Sometimes she would fall asleep with her head resting against my shoulder, a half-finished report open beside her. Those moments grounded me more than any success could. When a documentary team from PBS came to film, I almost refused. I didn't want cameras turning our story into spectacle again. Brooke convinced me otherwise. "This time," she said, "we control the story." The film aired under the title Roots of Continuity, and the response surprised us both. Schools began teaching our research as an example of interdisciplinary cooperation. The narrative had shifted. What was once scandal had become a model. One afternoon, after a meeting with the grant committee, Brooke appeared at my office door holding 2 mugs of tea. "We should take a walk," she said. "You've been inside too long." The sky outside was pale and open. We followed a trail that curved through the grove behind the center. The oaks stood tall, their leaves turning bronze. Birds darted between branches, and somewhere in the distance the river hummed softly. Brooke stopped beside a small clearing and turned toward me. "I was thinking," she said, "about how everything we've done started by accident. A pit, a bone, a handful of soil. Maybe accidents are just the land's way of getting our attention." Maybe, I agreed. Or maybe it chooses who listens. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint freckles on her nose, the flecks of gold in her irises. Then it chose right. Her kiss was gentle this time, not rushed or secretive, just sure. The wind caught in the branches above, scattering a few leaves around us. When she pulled back, she smiled. "You're supposed to say something profound now, Dr. Santoro." I laughed quietly. Everything profound has already been said. That night, we stayed late at the center reviewing new findings. A graduate student had uncovered another layer of tools suggesting long-term forest stewardship. As Brooke examined the pieces, she looked up at me with that familiar spark of curiosity. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked. "The people who started all this?" "All the time," I said. They understood something we're still learning, that preservation isn't about keeping things untouched, it's about tending. She nodded slowly, her thumb tracing a faint line on the stone artifact. "Then maybe we're continuing their work." Later, when the lights were out and only the faint glow from the computer screen remained, I realized how quiet the world felt. Outside, the wind carried the same rhythm it always had, soft and steady. For the first time since the chaos began, I wasn't thinking about damage control or reputation. I was thinking about legacy, about how stories rooted in truth eventually find their way through the noise. Weeks later, on a clear afternoon, we gathered again at Rosa's greenhouse for something different. Friends, colleagues, and family filled the space. The orchids she'd arranged glowed under the sunlight. Rosa stood near the entrance, grinning as she waved us forward. "3 years ago, you asked me how to keep an orchid alive," she said. "Turns out you were asking about each other." Brooke wore a linen dress the color of sand. I wore a simple cream suit. The ceremony was short, quiet, full of laughter and soft tears. When Rosa pronounced us married, the applause felt like wind moving through leaves. Brooke's hands trembled slightly as she slipped the ring onto my finger, a band etched with a pattern of roots entwined around a small emerald. Afterward, we danced beneath the hanging lights, surrounded by people who had once doubted us. The air smelled of flowers and soil, the same scent that had followed us from the beginning. "Any regrets?" she whispered as we turned slowly to the music. "Only that it took this long to find you," I said. The evening melted into gold. When the guests began to leave, we walked outside, hand in hand, toward the field behind the greenhouse. The horizon was painted in pink and blue, the first stars faint above. Brooke knelt to scoop a handful of soil, letting it sift through her fingers. "Still breathing," she said. I crouched beside her. "Always." In the distance, the new research center glowed softly under the night lights. Inside, graduate students were already cataloging samples, carrying our work forward. The sight filled me with a quiet certainty. The story no longer belonged to us alone. It belonged to the land, to those who came before, and to those who would continue after. Brooke stood and brushed her hands clean. "Ready for tomorrow?" "Always," I answered, taking her hand. As we walked back toward the greenhouse, the wind moved through the fields in a slow rhythm, like the heartbeat of something ancient and alive. For a moment, I thought I could hear it speaking not words, just the pulse of continuity, the sound of roots growing deeper, unbroken, beneath our feet. Some stories begin in silence and end in growth, not the kind that comes from fame, but from finding someone who listens to the same rhythm beneath the noise. Maya and Brooke learned that love, like the earth, thrives when tended with patience and truth. What started as a simple excavation became a reminder that every connection, buried or blooming, deserves care. In the quiet between discoveries, they found a heartbeat that matched their own. This has been She and She, where every woman's story roots itself in love, resilience, and the courage to keep growing.